90s, I was one of the few people, along with Joel Tudor, riding longboards in this area, and we were always kind of laughed at and picked on, and every once in a while we'd see some other like-minded people, and Tom was a little bit older than us, but he was super inspirational. Anyways, we heard he was coming to town, so we wanted to have him stop by, have him talk to you guys about his latest passion, Elias surfboards, and also tell you about the environmental message behind these boards he's doing. So I'd like to introduce you to Tom Wegener. If you could please come on up, and thanks again for coming out, folks.
Well, thanks, Devin. That was really nice. And it's so awesome to work with Patagonia on this. And thank you very much for having me. Okay. Well, we'll just get right into it because it's getting a bit chilly. The last time I was here, I was playing Siestas Nolas in the La Paloma Theater. Did anybody see it there? Yeah. Okay. Yay. So we were playing Siestas Nolas all around California, and finally I'd taken it, we were going to Australia. We took it to Australia, and I was just taken back by the beauty of the place. And we were playing it up and down the coast, and I just sort of fell in love with the place. And I'd found what I just thought was the most perfect wave in the world, and then alongside that I found the most beautiful girl in the world. So I met Margie in Noosa Heads, and after 2 weeks of knowing her, I asked her to marry me. And within 2 months, we were married on the beach. And during our honeymoon, we found that Margie was pregnant. So I went from being a very free spirit to having to be very, very responsible and produce an income in a very short amount of time. When in Noosa, the waves are perfect for the traditional longboards, and progressive longboarding with heavy rockers and tri-fins were super popular, and there was not one single fin to be found. And I said, well, I could pretty quickly start making an income making my traditional longboards in Australia. So I started making them, but I had one big problem, and that is I needed to make a traditional longboard, I had to make them wider, especially with a wider tail. So I found this stringer, the wide stringer there. I found Paulownia. And Paulownia was this amazing wood. It was light. It was a bit better than balsa to work with, and I was able to glue it into my blanks to make them flat with a wider tail. And Noosa was a perfect point, so I was able to really expand on the whole nose riding concepts and make these super nose riders because I could surf perfect surf almost all the time. And as time went on, it took about 4 years, and we had a pretty good little scene going. That's Finley, down at the bottom down there. And I was making the fiberglass boards. And everything was at my factory there. I was just working. We bought a plot of land, and I was making the surfboards, and the shed right there, and the house is right there. And everything was really cozy. And I'd finally reached this level. I was using the Paulownia, and I was finding that it's really easy to work with. And with the fins and so forth, the resin really stuck to it well, and it had these properties where it didn't soak up salt water. Like I could bang up my fins, and they would never delaminate. The cedar would delaminate, and I was really happy with the Paulownia, but I wasn't happy with using resin anymore. And one day, my son Finley said, "Daddy, your breath smells like resin." And I said, well, that's it. I will not have resin in my factory anymore. There's got to be a better way. And pieces of a puzzle were coming into my head of making a pure Paulownia surfboard because it doesn't suck up salt water. It's light, it's plentiful, it's grown on plantations. And so I went down and looked at the plantations, and that's a Paulownia tree, and that guy planted it about 10 years earlier. And so I just sat looking at the ceiling at night saying, well, I've got to get rid of fiberglass and resin, or just make so few boards that it doesn't really matter. I've got to make it out of pure Paulownia because I love the stuff, and it's would make a board that would last forever. And at that time, I had a friend named Jeff Auer who lived north of me, and he wanted to make a wooden surfboard. So I said, well, let me give you some ideas. And there's the board right there with the D-fin on it. And my brother was down at the same time visiting, and we were talking about the boards and how we could possibly make a hollow surfboard. And Jeff made his, kind of to my instruction, the big D-fin right on the tail, like I like, and wrote it, and it rode so good, it just blew my mind out. And I just said, okay, now foam is truly obsolete because this guy made a better board than I can make out of foam. And so I went about making the first big jig and buying up Paulownia and spending a lot of time. And my wife was kind of thinking I was nuts because she was just saying, wait a minute, you got to the level where you always wanted to be. Why do you have to change everything all of a sudden? And I said, well, that's kind of the way I am. We're going to run with this and just try to make our first board. So I developed this clamping process here, and it took a long time. And the first board I rode that's the one right there. That's Baby Sunday on the bottom of the board there. And I rode that board for 20 minutes, and it just wasn't right, and it leaked. And I went, oh, okay. That's not quite right, honey. I've got to make another one. So I made the second one, and it took about another 40 hours to make it. And I rode that about 3 times, and I said, that's not right either. And so I made a third board, and by this time, the wheels were coming off, but I just said, we have to do this. But the third one was indeed perfect. And that board is the best nose rider I've ever ridden, and it still, today, years later, would ride exactly the same as the first day I rode it. The boards so far haven't aged, and that's after about 1,000 times on the rocks, because you could ding the boards up, and you just patch them up again, and the wood doesn't deteriorate, and so the flex never changes. With these boards, they brought me back to the balsa wood boards I rode through the 80s. Back in the early 80s, you could pick up balsa wood boards for under $50, and I had 3 of them, and I loved the way they rode. But every time I rode one of those balsa boards, I would have to repair the dings again. They would just always open up all by themselves. Where these boards, this board was right there at that level of riding really good, if not better. And I've got to quickly mention this is my good friend Nathan Oldfield, who has taken this footage, and he let me use it. Here, this is in a movie called Lines of a Poem. This is lift. What a hollow nose rider does, it gives you lift right there, where the hollowness of the board just throws you out on the shoulder harder than anything I'd ever experienced. By this time, we were tired and broke, and so my wife said, why don't you take our little newsletter and put it out there and say you'll make 10 nose riders for $1,000 a piece. And I said, okay. So within 2 weeks, we had $10,000 in the bank, and I was able to just run with the project. So I got all this wood, I got my tools, and immediately I said a 12-footer would work better.